Hello, good afternoon. My name is Azim, and I am an LBJ School Barbara Jordan Student Chair. It is my pleasure to welcome our audience and today's speakers to the 24th Annual Barbara Jordan National Forum Keynote Panel. For 24 years, the LBJ School has honored the life and work of pioneering public servant and policymaker, civil rights leader, and educator Barbara Jordan, who rose to the national stage from Houston, Texas. A friend and advisor to President Lyndon Johnson, she was the first Black woman elected to the Texas Senate and the first Black Texan elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Jordan ended her esteemed career at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs as the Centennial Chair of Public Policy, where she taught from 1979 to 1996. Her legacy, fighting for equality, social justice, and integrity in public service, helps to shape and guide the school's mission today. And each year, the Barbara Jordan National Forum honors her memory. This year's forum asks us to think not only about Jordan, but about her words. What the people want is simple. They want an America as good as promised. Like Jordan, we at the LBJ School believe that the gap between promise and reality can one day be closed through our public service mission. Thank you to everybody for being here, and many thanks to our esteemed panel for joining the LBJ School during this very important celebration and tradition. With that, I would like to introduce you to my other co-chairs, Aaron, Barbara, and then Claudia.
Thanks, Z, for that. My name is Aaron Escajeda, and I am a dual degree student with social work and public affairs. This is my third and final year. This is my second year as a co-chair for the Barbara Jordan annual forum, and it's been an honor to do this for 2 years as I continue to learn and just think about the legacy that Barbara Jordan left. And I'm excited to learn from our panel today and how we can leave and take this legacy forward. Claudia?
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everybody. My name is Claudia Sandoval. I'm one of the other student co-chairs for the Barbara Jordan National Forum. I am also a Master of Public Affairs student at the LBJ School, graduating in May. And I have previous experience in technology and government, which really led to an interest in urban innovation and how that can help spur equity in our cities. And I'm currently a fellow with the National Development Council, doing work focused in economic and community development, as well as affordable housing. And I am just really honored to be a part of this event and something that is a tradition for the LBJ School. The more that I learn about Barbara Jordan, the more I'm proud to be a student and soon alumna of LBJ. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and I'll pass it on to our other Barbara.
Hi, thanks, Claudia. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm Barbara Tupiaden, and I am also a co-chair. I am a second-year MPAff student, will be graduating in May. I focus mainly on diversity, equity, and inclusion and how those policies can transform our workspaces. I'm super excited to be celebrating Barbara Jordan's legacy as a Black woman at the LBJ School. It's just very inspiring to hear about the work that she's done just in Texas, in Congress. Really gives us that ability to think of seeing myself in these spaces that maybe I would rather not have thought of seeing myself. And also, always have to mention this, she is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which is also my sorority. So I am very, very proud to always honor her legacy. And I'll pass it back over to you, Z.
Okay, so Commissioner Ellis, As commissioner of one of the largest and most diverse cities in the country, what does an America as good as promised look for Harris County? And where are we falling short?
Harris County is a major place in terms of population and size. We are very diverse, probably the most diverse county and city in the country. We think of Houston, obviously, but Harris County is much bigger than that, about 5 million people, a little below 5 million. Cook County is still slightly larger, Chicago. Los Angeles will be number one. So we are a third now. You know, New York doesn't have a county system. But I think that phrase by Professor Jordan really speaks to the aspirations of not only what we hope our county or our state will be, but the ideals of America. You know, the promise was something far different from the reality of what was going on. I mean, such magnificent words. She was making reference to the founders of this country had such beautiful words, but they weren't practicing it. It was an aspiration. So I think what she was saying was, in government, for me as a county official, what can we do to fulfill that promise, that image we want it to be? So you think about what has happened here in Harris County and in Houston, from a record flood to a snowstorm, a drought some years ago when I was in the Senate. We've fallen short in a lot of ways. You know, we got one of the biggest divides in Houston, Harris County between those who have and those who don't have. And we're making some progress. You know, I left the state government where I served for about 26 years in the Senate. I was on city council for about 6 years. But here we didn't have simple things like a minority business enterprise program. So we could bring more minorities and women into contracting opportunities with the county. And when we did a disparity study, that's something the Supreme Court requires. That was a lawsuit to try to avoid programs like this during the anti-affirmative action era. So you got to go reconstruct your tax return, so to speak, to see if there are elements of discrimination and if you have capacity. We did it, and what it came back showing us was we spent about $5 billion. Less than 0.5% of the county's dollars went to Black-owned businesses. So we did disparity study. We're putting a program in place. We set a goal on most contracts of about 25% going to minority women-owned businesses. So we're going to make progress. We have equity guidelines in most of what we do with the Harvey recovery money. So we don't just go and protect those neighborhoods that historically got protected. And with this new round of money coming from federal government, which I think will be akin to a lot of what LBJ did and what FDR did in terms of moving people out of poverty, I'm going to advocate we have some equity guidelines so we don't just take that money to go fill holes on things that we can pay for with our money, that we figure out what we can do to bring more people out of poverty in this urban county.
And that is amazing. I apologize. I got so excited introducing another UT Law and LBJ alum that we forgot to do introduction. So I'll pass it back to Claudia, who will introduce all of our speakers.
Thanks, Z. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us. We're honored to have you all. We have Commissioner Rodney Ellis, who you all just heard from. He was born and raised in Houston's Sunnyside neighborhood, and he is a Harris County Commissioner and an LBJ school alum. Hook 'em horns. Ranjana, I apologize if I get this wrong, Natarajan, has directed the Civil Rights Clinic at the University of Texas School of Law since 2013. Students who work with the clinic represent low-income students in a variety of civil rights matters, including police misconduct, jail mistreatment, debtors, prisons, and disability discrimination. Thank you for joining us. And we have Mercedes Fulbright, who leads the Texas Working Families Party as organizing director with a mission to build a mass multiracial anti-racist movement of regular people coming together despite their differences to make a better future for all Texans. So thank you, Mercedes. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll continue with our questions.
All right, so Commissioner Ellis, you mentioned Lyndon B. Johnson and Barbara Jordan. Can you mention what it means to continue their legacy?
I do want to say I'm glad to be with Ranjana and Mercedes, by the way, and they know I got to hop off early because our brilliant Latinx county judge has a press conference about equity on the vaccine distribution, and I'm going to join her for that at her office in a few minutes. But I'm so glad to be with them and look forward. I read about you. I want to get to know more about you. My state Senate seat covered a big part of what Professor Jordan had when she was in the Texas Senate. You know, when Professor Jordan left, the Texas Senate went to Congress. In 1972, for about a decade, we had no African American in the Senate. During the redistricting process, she was not able to protect that seat. And in Congress, she was one of the leaders for the reenactment of the Voting Rights Act, which is a Martin Luther King LBJ original when it passed. So I'm very cognizant of with most things I do and throughout my career, trying to fulfill Barbara Jordan's promise. I did get to know her well, campaigned with her for Ann Richards when she was running for governor, and I had the privilege or sometimes the disdain of taking her around because I wasn't one of her students, but she'd be pretty hard on you. And it was at a time when she hated being in that wheelchair, so she'd give me a hard time if I couldn't, figure out how to get her out quickly before we went into churches. But if I'm ever giving a speech, I had her debate coach as well, Tom Freeman, at Texas Southern University. I don't have that brilliant voice that Professor Jordan had, but I'm very cognizant when I go do this press conference with my county judge. A lot of people in politics, some great LBJ type staffer writes a speech. And even if somebody has said it, some politicians just go read it again. So in the tradition of Barbara Jordan and LBJ, I remember once, I think it was Barbara Jordan told me, somebody said what you wanted to say, you don't have to say it again. So that means that I will be attentive because I'm trying to think of how to phrase it in a way that will get somebody's attention. As Professor Jordan's debate coach and mine said, the rule for a good speech maker is make them laugh, make them cry, make some damn sense. And if you can only do one of the three, just make sense and be as boring as hell and sit down. So do make sense. But if you can hit all three, you can touch their heart. You can use some humor and you can make sense. Usually you got something somebody will pay attention to. Hey, I listened to every one of those LBJ tapes that I could get my hands on when I was at the LBJ school. I had hell with that statistics class. I ended up being an investment banker, but that two-tailed probability test just gave me hell. But I gotten pretty good. I learned enough to make a decent living as an investment banker before I got out of the business. But listening to all those LBJ tapes, it helps me as a policymaker when I try to put myself in somebody else's shoes and figure out how to make an issue ripe. It's not enough to just go advocate for something that I think makes sense. I got to make it ripe. I got to figure out, do people march? Do they demonstrate? You do op-eds, you do press conference, now you do social media. You know what I mean? How to count. You got me? And now that I'm on a 5-person governing board, unlike when I was in the Senate, I can't walk around and line up the votes. I can only talk to one on the open meetings. So I got to try to think of how I get my third vote. And sometimes I have to figure out how I impact the other two, because it's better to have 4 than 5. So I'm very cognizant, is my short answer, of being in the seat, representing many of the people that Professor Jordan represented, and being a graduate of LBJ school and every one of the books, bestsellers, every one of them, even on audiobooks. I'm very cognizant of how he thought and how he moved in the corridors of power as a legislator.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So how did the levers of policy extended another promise to the American people?
I think right now, one of the most challenging things going on is to reenact the Voting Rights Act again, by the way. And you all are watching the debate over whether or not to end the filibuster curtail it a bit. And to answer your question, I was thinking the other day with some people, if this were some other country, if they were doing this in Vietnam or China, I mean, the basic tenement of a democratic form of government is the rules are fair on how you get there. And it just amazes me how people don't even hide, just racist. I mean, how could you say, some person in line for hours to vote, you can't give them water or food, or you can't vote on a Sunday. Here we are in the Bible Belt. I mean, how could you even fathom a law, knowing that Black groups in particular do the, pews to the polls kind of deal, just blatant. So I think we had a perilous time in our history and our reputation around the globe, because it's difficult to protect the basic tenets of a democracy if the rules are not fair. And I think about that filibuster rule, which was something created mainly to thwart civil rights, by the way. There was whole rationale behind it. But it's a big challenge. And whatever we've done to demonize politics so much now, so that people tend to hate one another so much. We're a reflection of you all, by the way. You get me? So when people will say, well, why do you politicians, why are you so mean-spirited? Look in the mirror. I mean, we really are a reflection of the people who put us here. That's the best answer I can give you on that one.
Okay, and last question, you talked about blatant racism. You have recently pushed to rename Baytown's Negro Head Lake. In fact, during your first term in the Texas Senate in 1991, you pushed to change the names of 19 different locations around the state. Can you tell me a little bit about the power of names and how the power behind public places and priorities reflect our values?
Words matter. Barbara Jordan was the epitome of that. I mean, she had I think it was Ann or somebody that made it come. It might have been President Clinton, the voice of God, when she'd speak. LBJ was a great storyteller, by the way. You got me? Just an interesting person to listen to. He didn't have Kennedy's eloquence as an example. He was a great storyteller. You know what I mean? Very, very entertaining, but always had a point to it. Words are so significant. Images matter to us. All around the planet, even in communities of color, by the way, we've done something to demonize Blackness. Whether I'm in India, Ranjana, or Libya, they called the darker skinned Blacks the blue people. In Cuba, in Brazil, where half the people are Black, and you ask somebody, so are you Afro? They say, oh, no, Portuguese. We've done something, in Nigeria, a booming industry for some time was all of the bleaching stuff. I'm going back to the power of words and images. What we see on the big screen, if you think it ought to be blue-eyed, blonde hair, we program ourselves. So, a House member came to me, and initially those names it was the other N word. It was not Negro Lake. It was the other N word. And there are all kinds of racist, misogynistic things we have, dead Indian Creek and, killing Japanese Hill. I mean, it's amazing symbols. That's why the people who lost the Civil War pretty much wrote the history, just reconfigure it. And that's why those things matter. So it's really an easy bill, passed unanimously. Some young intern who was working for NPR called me up after the George Floyd tragedy, which I think was a watershed moment in this country. It just created such a reckoning, particularly with you millennials. Y'all just thinking you mad as hell and you're not taking it anymore. But so this reporter called me up with NPR and said, you passed a bill in 1991 to change the names of these lakes and creeks and hills. I said, well, sure. I vaguely remember it. What about it? He said, well, they only changed one. So, when you're a legislator, I think I might have passed about 700 bills or so. So once I did it, I forgot about it. And we named it in the bill, I couldn't remember why I named it after Judge Henry Doyle. I thought it's because he just passed. Turns out, which is an interesting footnote, Henry Doyle was the first, when the state of Texas created Texas State University for Negroes in 1947 to keep from integrating the University of Texas. Thurgood Marshall was looking for such a great case, find a place where they were just so mean-spirited. He didn't start with elementary schools. Didn't start with graduate school. And so UT didn't want to integrate the law school, Professor Ranjana. So they created a law school for Heman Sweat. And it took a little while to get it going. So Henry Doyle, when they created Texas State University of Negroes, a law school in Austin, over behind the Capitol, in what I think became the Quorum Club in the basement. They had 2 black men, 3 black women. 3 black women stopped for whatever reason. One of the black guys stopped. Only one stayed. Judge Doyle, Henry Doyle, and they decided at some point, well, let's move this thing to Houston. So they loaded the stuff up on a couple of little pickup trucks, books or whatever they had, desk, hauled it to Houston. A student, Henry Doyle, followed the trucks to Houston and graduated. And they thought, the Attorney General thought he was, I think a quote in the paper, was a fine example of what the Negro can accomplish under separate and equal. And then Henry Doyle became a civil rights lawyer and later became a judge. Governor Briscoe appointed him to a bench. So I think I didn't know all that history at the time in 1991, but we did it. But look, these names matter. You know, my kids were at a high school in Houston where they had the Redskins mascot. I read about it in the paper and went to the superintendent to get rid of it, by the way. And I remember they were threatening to whip my son over at the school. And, you know, he's all scared. I said, son, come on now. You know, but I did call the principal and said, look, I chair the Board of Innocence Project. I'm a big criminal justice reformer. If one kid touches my child, I'll get him put under the jail. So please keep them from doing that. But look, these things matter. So I've got a Robert E. Lee. I got rid of a Robert E. Lee Street. I've got a Dixie Farm Road Park, and I want to name it after a local civil rights icon. And it's in a white community. If they get upset, I don't want at his age for him to go through that potential embarrassment. I may go out there and name it Black Lives Matter Park, but that Dixie Farm Road name is leaving before I leave this office. I'm getting rid of it, but names matter. And I think we ought to use our public spaces to venerate issues we believe in. We just put a mural up for Black History Month, largest mural in Houston, to commemorate efforts of the United Nations to end hunger. Great mural. And it was interesting, Japanese artists who did it. None of the kids had faces of hunger. So very, very, very vibrant. It makes you think about the issue, but it doesn't depress you. And I think on the top of my county attorney's building, which was a famous slave auction block, I'm going to see if I can get a mural done in commemoration of gender equality. The United Nations has passed a resolution in support of that. And I don't want to, you want to do things to inspire people, to motivate people, to get people like you students who on this call to go out here and do what Ranjana has done and do what Mercedes has done and they are doing to take an interest in making life better for people.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So to all the panelists, what do you think that we could do to better ensure an America's promise for in our generation?
Ranjana and Mercedes, I'm going to be quiet and let you all jump in for a change.
Mercedes, you want to go first? So I think that, thanks, Mercedes. I was going to say, I think it's important to kind of know what the promises that Barbara Jordan and all of us allude to, right? And we think about it as access to the American dream. And maybe that's about upward mobility, but if you really unpack it, it's about things like
making sure we all have adequate and nutritious food, safe and habitable housing, access to a quality education, a job that delivers a livable wage and the opportunity to build wealth, and the ability to care for ourselves and our loved ones through healthcare and other opportunities. And so I think that's part of the promise, but there's a second part of the promise of the American dream. That is that there's equal access to that dream for everyone without discrimination, without harassment, or without violence on the basis of race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, immigration status. I think it's important to just remember that that is still what we are fighting for in terms of the promise. And if we think about kind of where's that promise and where's our reality, there's an enormous gap. And it's widening. It has been widening because of economic inequalities that are widening, as you all know and have studied, and because, and as Commissioner Ellis alluded to, racism has been baked into the system, and we keep having these watershed moments where it reveals itself over and over and over again. And what we realize is we need truth, we need reconciliation, and those are the beginning points for disassembling these structures of white supremacy that dominated really every area of civic society, culture, and the economy. So we have a lot of unfinished business. And we know, because we have been subjected to, I would say, colorblind policy solutions, that they haven't worked. They haven't been enough. And so we have to have race conscious and intersectionally conscious policy solutions. And that's what you all, as the next generation of policymakers, will be bringing us and will be fighting for. And I want to also just take a minute to pause on that point, which is the intersectionality is so important, right? It's so important to understand how sexual harassment, transphobia, and just ordinary misogyny all intersect with racism at the same time. And I think that all of us kind of identify ourselves and can relate our histories. So I came here as an immigrant when I was 7 years old from India. And Commissioner Ellis is absolutely right. Anti-Black racism is pervasive. It's not only in the US, it's not only in Western Europe, it's pervasive all over the world. And 500 years of colonialism, slavery, and settler colonialism and genocide have really ingrained that kind of thinking and the images and the words that go with it. And so sometimes I challenge my students and I say, look, we need to be working on this in the same way the colonial powers were working on this in the opposite direction for 500 years. It is a deep existential challenge to get to the reality that we have to the promise of what America can be. And so I say that because it's good to remember too, that the last few years have exacerbated racism, including anti-Black racism, anti-immigrant, brown and Black xenophobia. But nothing started in 2016. These are all ongoing enterprises that have pervaded our culture and society. And I think, Commissioner Ellis, your stories were so important because I think storytelling is critical to kind of knowing our own history and being able to move forward from it. So maybe I'll stop there and let Mercedes talk. And then I want to come back and pick up maybe on the hunger point and food, if we can.
I appreciate that. You said all the things that I would say. And so I'm going to be sure to try to touch on some other areas, especially as someone who was invited here to speak from the perspective and voice of an organizer. I would say over the last year, if not over the last decade, if not the last few generations, organizers have been the folks who have been leading the way. And for sure, if you all haven't witnessed just the last year and even just last month, like organizers were the folks who were leading on the mutual aid effort when the government failed us, right? We were leading on the efforts when it came to protests and the summer uprisings and making a clear, urgent demand that it is time to stop funneling so much money to the police when we are experiencing multiple crises like economic, racial, public health, a number of things, right? And understanding that that money gets taken from us every single city, county, and federal budget cycle towards a system and sort of state that doesn't allow for our families, for our communities to thrive. And so I really appreciate the students here for inviting a voice like mine, an organizer who is on the ground, having to be in conversation and also having to be in community with folks who are wanting these demands to our elected officials like Commissioner Ellis. I appreciate always being in the space with him because he is one of those bold, courageous political leaders at the county level that is doing exactly what it is that we need and deserve as the community, as families, as working families. And so before I go into some of the things of why I see how the economy can play into realizing the promise of America, I think it's important that storytelling is told. And so for folks who may not know me, my name is Mercedes Fulbright. I'm a proud Southern Black queer feminist organizer. To be invited to be a part of a panel like this, I just remember when I went to University of North Texas and thought about being a civil rights attorney, and Barbara Jordan actually being one of my North Stars. And in that moment at 18, when I first became politicized as a student, it was through the election of President Barack Obama in 2008. And in that moment, seeing myself as a Black woman, as a Black person, being able to aspire to such a high office, and years from that date, that election date, deepening my own analysis and understanding of the world and the systems that make and break our communities. And for me, the first moment I started to question power is when I was turned away at the polls the next semester when I tried to vote in my local Denton County elections. And my student address didn't match the home address that I had on my license, right? And you all may be familiar with this, voter ID laws, right? And Commissioner Ellis talks about the need for us to fight for access to voter rights. And so that actually propelled me into organizing. And since then, since I was 18, I'm 31 now, I've committed myself to this struggle of organizing and building people power with everyday people, not only in the city of Dallas, but across the state of Texas. I'm also a founding member of a coalition called In Defense of Black Lives Dallas. We formed in response to the summer uprisings last year, and we have been for years, but definitely through this coalition last summer, demanding and pushing elected officials at the city and county level to reimagine public safety. And I do think that this pandemic has exposed not only the anti-Black racism that has been plaguing our communities for centuries, but also has exposed how much money we waste on policing and criminalizing communities who desperately are stuck in poverty, who are desperately having to fight the many barriers that don't allow them to have access to food security, to child daycare, to livable wages, to a number of things that results in people having to deal with crime, right? And having to fight over resources with each other. And so for me, as someone who has aligned myself with the independent progressive political party through the Working Families Party, I see myself as someone who is organizing everyday people to come across differences, multiracial backgrounds, different lived experiences, and coming together in the same way that you saw us come together last year, where over 25 million people across the globe said, you know what, you're gonna stop killing Black people. The police are gonna stop killing Black people. Through our party, we see ourselves doing that and using the power of elections to elect the very people from our communities to represent us, to fight for us, right? We want the Black mom that quit her job because of the pandemic, because she couldn't actually afford daycare for her kid, to be the same city council member that fights for universal daycare for her children, right? That fights to make sure that when they say, Governor Abbott says it's time for you to go back to school, that same Black mother who decides to run for school board trustee is fighting for the safety that the children need in Dallas ISD to go back to school safely, right? And so those are, for me, are some of the many promises that this country should be having. Truth and storytelling is absolutely important as we talk about the racism and injustices that have happened in this country. I'm also thinking about the need for us to continue to push and elect progressives to go big and bold, to not have excuses, to not have exceptions. The 1.9 trillion relief package was a big step forward, right? But it's a start. It should not be the end. There's so much more that our government should be doing in this moment right now when we think about the climate crisis, right? Like what happened here in Texas should be an alarm for the rest of this country, if not for the rest of the world, and what's happening with our planet and the fact that our planet is burning. I'm thinking about the just recovery that our folks deserve and need to get out of this pandemic. The fact that we are still struggling after electing a progressive president to fight for livable wages when we kept calling workers essential, when we kept calling them heroes, but we won't get them out of poverty. We won't actually allow them to have the money, the things that they need to take care of their families. And so I'm telling people to stop calling them essential workers. They're sacrificial lambs in the ways that you all are treating them as politicians. And so I think it's important that we name these things and call it what it is, right? I love how you talked about colorblind politics. Like for me, it's really about getting past like the soft language and actually saying, no, livable wages must happen now, urgently, not tomorrow, not, a year from now, not when we elect a new Senate or a new president, but now. And we are experiencing that, we're seeing that. And as organizers, we are coming together. We are standing on the front line with frontline essential workers, and we are fighting this battle with them and not leaving them behind and making sure that their voices are heard.
Thank you so much for that. The Deltas are so strong in this panel right now. I'm excited for y'all. Ranjana, I want to switch back to you. I know you wanted to talk about hunger and food, and also you mentioned hate crimes and racism. Can you talk a little bit more about what a hate crime is under the law and how it's prosecuted as well?
Sure. So the reason I wanted to talk about food and shelter is because I wanted to just kind of like focus a little bit more on the basics of what we're all entitled to, which I think Mercedes was just alluding to, right? Which is a living wage. And that Fight for 15 movement has been going on now for almost a decade, since 2012. So I think one lesson to be learned there, as in other places, is what persistence and doggedness we all have to have when advocating for these things that we know are really essential and are just the bare minimum in order to help people kind of have the lives that they deserve and to allow communities to really flourish. So in that vein, I wanted to talk a little bit about food insecurity and what the COVID pandemic has taught us about that as well. Texas has one of the highest rates of child food insecurity in the nation. There's about 1.6 million children in Texas who lack adequate nutrition, and that impacts how they grow, play, and learn. It's gotten worse during COVID because of unemployment. And so there's a study that said in November of last year, about 2.6 million adults, that's about 14% in Texas, reported that their household didn't have enough food to eat in the past 7 days. And I pick food for two reasons. One, I started my career doing food and hunger policy at the Congressional Hunger Center, which was started by Mickey Leland, also an alumnus of Houston. And he had a vision that was incredibly important, which is, and it's one that Barbara Jordan shared, which is, in this land of plenty, we should not have hungry children. That shouldn't be allowed. That's a moral failing on our part. And of course, we've had 30 years since Mickey Leland had those insights, where we can see that it's food distribution systems and income distribution systems that cause hunger, and not an inadequate supply of food itself. And as with anything else, there are racial disproportionalities in food insecurity. So in Texas, food insecurity was at least twice as high for Black families, 29%, and for Latinx families, 20%, as what white adults reported, 12% for households with children. And I just say that to say we have so much work to do, but there's a tremendous amount of work being done every day. Now, we know with our legislature, and I would love to hear from Commissioner Ellis about this as well. We know with our legislature, sometimes wins means preventing some of the worst laws that could be passed. And so that's why, for example, right now, I think it's Representative Kane has a bill where he wants to prohibit people who receive SNAP benefits, which are, food benefits, from buying certain food and drink items. Well, putting more restrictions on people who are struggling is hardly the thing that we need, right? Expanding opportunities, expanding educational opportunities, workforce development, and actually giving people greater freedoms is what we need. Expanding access to immigrants for SNAP. That's what we need, not restricting access. And one of the problems is that our legislature, has become a real obstacle for so many decades now in terms of providing help to ordinary people so that we can make the promise of America come true. And I picked food, but of course you could look at Medicaid expansion, you could look at housing access, and a variety of other things.
It is interesting, and this will be my last comment, how far right the Texas legislature has gone. And I think that's one reason why they're pushing such restrictive additional voter access laws to reduce access, because you got a small far right element that controls the grand old party. And they're trying to stay in power. It's pretty embarrassing. It was good to hear you mention Mickey's name. You know, when I left the LBJ school, maybe went to law school a couple years later, I ended up being his chief of staff when he created that select committee on world hunger. But look, I think of some of the really brilliant ideas coming out of some other states, like California in particular. You talk about racial diversity. I didn't know this till a couple weeks ago. They passed a bill in California, Governor Newsom signed, requiring if you're a publicly traded company based in California, you have to diversify your governing board with women and people of color. They even added an LGBT component to it as well, or you pay a fine. It'll be challenged in courts, and about 11 other states have followed suit because, you know, part of Dr. King's last struggle, by the way, was how you integrate the money. And that's when people really fight. I mean, now we're going back and have to fight for access to the ballot, but it is just such an important issue, access to affordable housing. In Texas, if you want to do housing credits, they have a law where your state rep has to sign a letter and you get some points for it. It's ridiculous. That's why you concentrate all of the affordable housing in poorer minority neighborhoods primarily. And I have to deal with that on my level. Host of issues on Medicaid expansion. How can we turn down that much money? And there's some breakthrough on one possible bill for maybe about 1 million people, but it's just so far, it's so ridiculous. And somehow we got to change that mindset, and it starts with people voting. I know I heard you, Mercedes. I just don't want to forget that. I hope there's such a continued focus on criminal justice reforms. And so much of that in Texas is inadequate indigent defense, because when you go face the system, it's primarily you and your lawyer and this repressive bail system. I mean, what the hell's wrong with a system where, because I have money now, I could post bail for my children, they could get out. People with the same profile have to stay in, and you sit there long enough and you plea. And I just hope that that watershed moment is more than just people saying that for reform. It is more than just a 6-letter word. Real tangible changes to come about. Look, I hate to leave, but I want to join my county judge. I'm so proud of her. Wish she'd been an LBJ student, but she's working on her master's in public affairs and just got out there and ran. I'll give you this line. Somebody was asking me about Beto running for governor the other day, and somebody asked, well, can he win? And I gave him a line Jesse Jackson gave me when I was a young kid working for Mickey Leland when Jesse Jackson was talking about running. I love this line. He said, people would say, why is he running? Can he win? He said, if we run, we might lose. If we don't run, we do lose. So you LBJ students, get the heck out there and run. Thank you. I got to go. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to Commissioner Ellis. Mercedes, I guess we'll switch to you. He talked a lot about running young. You are definitely a person that I didn't realize is I think 2-3 years ahead of me. So I'm kind of embarrassed that I haven't ran for something. Can you please talk a lot about community organizing and about criminal justice reform specifically?
Yeah. So on the topic of community organizing, I think it is important for folks to see it as an avenue outside of just like, oh, let me find a job in it, but actually something that you can do every day. That could easily be through participating in these city council hearings, right? Every year they vote on a city budget. And if you look at any of the major city budgets in this state, you will see where that money goes, and it goes primarily to the police. And so I keep bringing it up because when we talk about realizing the promise of America, it really does look like taking care of our people. And taking care of our people doesn't mean allowing them to sit in a cage because of marijuana charges, because a mother was getting diapers for their child that they couldn't afford. There's a number of petty things that people are sitting in cages for, that when you look at your city budget, you actually could say, you know what, we could have provided enough funds for that family to have diapers. We could have provided enough funds for that person to have the sort of, training for whatever job they're looking for. And so when I think about simple community organizing, it is things like that, being able to call into your city council hearing, to voice your opinions, to let it be clear that it's not just Mercedes who cares about reimagining public safety, but it actually is my neighbor down the street and, my cousin and whoever else. When I think about running for office, I definitely look at it from the perspective of how do we get people closer to power, especially those who are closest to the pain. And so the work that I do through the Working Families Party, which is much different from the Democratic Party or even the Republican Party, is that we try to find our own people. For us, that looks like single mothers. That looks like the recent college grad or the student that didn't go to college, actually, the person that didn't go to college, the high school dropout, right? And understanding that because they are closest to the pain, they are closest to the very things that are creating much of the gaps and the inequities and the injustice in our country, they're going to be the best people to provide the policy solutions to make sure that we are okay and that everyone else is collectively. And so for folks who are going through this program and may look at a Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders or whoever, I want you to be sure to look at your own community and try to start there. When I talk to folks who are interested in running for office, I ask them to look at their city council seat, their school board seats, some of these board and commissions. Those are actually the seats that most impact people every day in their lives. And so before you decide to take a leap like Congress or state or running for governor, what does it look like for you to actually serve your community in ways that directly impact them through city services, like funding public libraries and making sure that kids have access to Wi-Fi hotspot because there's a digital gap happening in our country. And so as someone who works for an independent progressive political party, if you're interested in that, we do provide candidate training for folks. For us, it really is about deepening people's analysis about these systems. We're not interested in just running run-of-the-mill traditional elected officials who don't actually look like the communities that they come from. And so for us, it's about sharpening not only your analysis about the world in which we live in and the systems that make and break communities, but also what does it look like for you to govern in a way that allows you to have a racial equity lens and really transform the communities that you come from.
I guess as policy students now, we have no excuse. I'm gonna pass it to Aaron Escajeda, who's going to get to questions from the audience.
Thanks, Z. And thank you to all the panelists and their very insightful comments and discussions. First off, I want to read like a comment from the chat, and then we'll have a question from the audience. If both of you can answer first, Ranjana and then Mercedes. So I think this was in response to what you said, Ranjana. If white supremacy engulfed every part of civic society, President Obama would not have been able to be president. That's a dangerous argument, and it's inaccurate to make a full generalization in America. In most countries, Obama would have never been able to be president. And the question from Lindsay Scott, thank you for that question. Given the various ways in which racial hate, xenophobia, and economic deprivation have exposed groups such as Black people, Asian Americans, and Latino migrants to violence and injustice, how do you three think we as a nation can chart a better way forward towards a diverse society that protects one another while avoiding the pitfalls of approaching problems through a carceral lens? So can you speak both on that comment and that question for a couple of minutes? Thank you.
When we were preparing for this talk, I went back and reviewed a number of Barbara Jordan quotes, and there are so many good ones, but here's one I'll share because I think it in part answers Lindsay's question. And here goes. She says, just remember the world is not a playground, but a schoolroom. Life is not a holiday, but an education. One eternal lesson for us all to teach us how better we should love. I think the difficult thing is all of us know in our hearts that this kind of work for social justice begins with our love for each other and our love for humanity. And it's a love that has to transcend a lot of difference diversity and diversity of viewpoints too. So I feel like that's an important thing to say. The second piece, I would say, I want to underline what Mercedes said earlier about people power. People power has made an enormous difference at the community level in terms of criminal law reform. And so whether you're talking about Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Hayes County, which is south of Austin, people have been able to put together bail funds so that they can get their neighbors out of detention instead of relying on systems that don't work. People have put together better civilian oversight systems for their police and law enforcement agencies. And people are pushing at the door of city council, as Mercedes said, to say, this is not the budget that reflects the people's priority. This is a budget that reflects the police's priority. And that's not what we want. And so I think moving forward with organizing and based on people power and really coming from a place of love, those two things are really important for us to reject the carceral state and to reject the idea that we have to, cage people in order to, quote, reform them, and to understand that a lot of criminal behavior is coming out of the social determinants that create conditions that are not livable for people. Mercedes, maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in there and say that I really love that, caging people is not helping people, either in our prisons or on the border. But yes, Mercedes, can you speak a little bit on the juxtaposition between the comment and the question that we heard right now?
Yeah, to the comment piece, I just want to say that electing Black faces doesn't absolve white supremacy in this country. You can see that across this country, across the world. And also, white supremacy didn't disappear for the 8 years that President Obama was in office. Not only did his family directly experience the ugly head of white supremacy, but Black people continued to be killed. And Latinx, undocumented Black and brown folks were also still being deported and put it into detention centers. There's a number of things that happened that came through the many tentacles that is white supremacy. And so I think it's important for when folks like us name those things, that it's us just truth telling. It's us peeling back this multi-layered onion that is this country that has not only the anchors of white supremacy, but capitalism, anti-Black racism, a number of things that is an entire different panel, to be honest. And so I just want to make clear that there are a number of Black and brown people that not only this party has helped to elect, but a number of people across this country has helped to elect who still have to experience and are still enduring and still having to navigate white supremacy. And so it is definitely in the fabric of this country. And it's something that just simply can't be ignored and washed away just because we're electing people that look like us. And then I'm trying to remember the second comment. So if you want to re-highlight it, Aaron, just really short. I can't even remember.
Question?
Yeah.
So this one's talking about how can we chart a better way forward towards a diverse society that protects one another while avoiding the pitfalls of approaching problems through a carceral lens.
Yeah. So the thing that's coming up for me, the Working Families Party, right now, we are organizing around the recess that Congress has taken. They decided to take a break in the midst of the multiple crises that we're having right now. And so as organizers, this isn't a time for us to take a break. And so we're actually organizing communities across the country to push and demand that Congress comes back and enacts the Thrive Act. So for us, it's a blueprint for the future. It's a plan that creates about 15 million dignified jobs for millions of workers. We believe it will also support a better life for millions of people who are vulnerable right now in this moment. And so if you're interested in that, I believe Claudia dropped our link for Working Families Party, but for us, it is being able to pass these really big, bold federal policies that will allow us to impact millions. I said 15 million folks, but 15 million people across the country. So we don't have to wait on Governor Abbott and these Texas legislators that Commissioner Ellis was speaking about, who actually don't care about us, who actually don't want to fight for us in this moment. And so again, I want to reiterate, the act is called the Thrive Act, and it is a real opportunity to create really good jobs that also calls to hand the fact that the the planet is burning and there's some opportunities for us to slow that down, but also create some economic equality across the board for millions of people in this country.
Thank you so much. And I wish we could just continue this conversation, but so we can end on a high note. What makes you hopeful in what you see throughout your work? And what can we hope for in our futures? And one or two sentences, very quick.
Yeah, one or two sentences. What makes me hopeful is the fact that I honestly, every day through this pandemic and definitely before this moment, seeing communities fill in the gaps when the state and the government has failed us, when our leaders have failed us. And so I'm extremely hopeful that in the midst of anything else that happens in the future, which there will always be something if we don't continue to unite as a people, that we will have each other's back and that collective care is the future.
I love that answer. And all I would add to it is, and to see the courage of so many people willing to get out into the streets and participate in dissent and civil disobedience and really take power on the streets is also so encouraging.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all three of our panelists. And now I'm going to pass it over to Barbara so we can end relatively on time.
Yes, thank you both so much for sharing your insight and just leaving us in this lens of optimism and just really thinking of how can we be more hopeful. I really enjoyed both of your comments. I just want to thank our panelists for being here with us today and really sharing everything that you did. Thank you to the LBJ School for entrusting in 3 students to really put on this event and honor the legacy of Barbara Jordan. And thank you to our audience for tuning in and being here with us throughout the week to talk about important issues about what America has promised its citizens. I just want to encourage you all to also look at the LBJ website at lbj.texas.edu, and you'll be able to find some of our events coming up in April. Thank you all and have a very good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.